Hello, friends. Welcome back to another episode of Theology in the Raw. If you are listening on the podcast, then I just want you to know this is also a YouTube channel. And if you're watching me on YouTube, hi, then that was dumb. If you're watching on YouTube and you're like, oh, I'd really just love to listen to this and not look at you, then you can go to my podcast, Theology in the Raw, and check it out. If you want to support the show, go to the show notes. You can check it out. You can go to patreon.com/Theology in the Raw. Support the show for as little as $5 a month to keep the show going. And if it's impacted you in any way, would appreciate your support. I have on the show today a good friend of mine, Don Pape. Don and I go back to 2011 when in a flurry of events, I ended up co-writing a book with Francis Chan called Erasing Hell. Some of you remember that book, and maybe that's how you first came across my name. Well, Don was the publisher of that book. In fact, Don is the guy who, several years before that, found some relatively unknown pastor in Simi Valley named Francis Chan and said, I think this guy has a voice that needs to be heard. And he signed Francis to a book deal to write a book called Crazy Love. Probably many of you have read it. Don is the master Yoda of Christian publishing. He has worked for several different publishing houses. He's been a literary agent. He's starting kind of a new thing called Pape Commons. You can check it out. I believe it's papecommons.com, but the link is in the show notes. And Don, I love Don because he's so honest. He will talk about the pros, the cons, and everything in between when it comes to Christian publishing. He's an amazing person to go to if you have questions about writing. And so we even talk about that. Like, if you want to write a book, what should you do? Should you self-publish? Should you try to get a mainstream publisher to look at it? And if you do actually get a contract, like what kind of finances are we looking at here for a first time or a new author? And then we talk about just all kinds of stuff related to Christian publishing. This is a different kind of conversation, a different topic. I've never done this before on the podcast, but I was like, man, I think there's a lot of you out there who want to be writers, or you would like to know what goes on behind the scenes in Christian publishing. So please welcome to the show for the first time, the one and only Don Pape. All right, I'm here with my, I could say my long-term friend, Don Pape. Don and we met way back in 2011 when
Fashion Island.
Yeah. Wait, what? Which?
It was a pub, an Irish pub.
An Irish pub.
Yeah.
In Irvine or something, or somewhere down.
It was Fashion Island.
That's right. Oh my gosh. So and we've been, I refer to you, I don't know if I've told you this, but you're kind of like the master Yoda of Christian publishing. You've got a long journey. You've been an agent. You work for several different Christian publishers. So, why don't we start there? Why don't you tell us why you got into publishing and give a few minute summary of the last 25 plus years or more about your journey in Christian publishing. And then I want to get into some of the nitty gritty about what that looks like and what you kind of hope it could look like if you had your finger on the button, so to speak. So give us a little snapshot of your journey.
Well, really, I started out some 36 years ago, actually. I was on InterVarsity staff in Canada, and at the time, InterVarsity Press actually had a publisher and a warehouse in Toronto, and we could make extra money. I worked on high school staff with InterVarsity, and you could make extra money going up to the warehouse, picking, packing, and shipping boxes. So, getting orders out the door. And that I caught the bug. My degree is in poli-sci, and I thought I was going to have a marvelous career in publishing, in poli-sci. As a foreign diplomat or something, and God got a hold of me, and that all changed. But anyway, got the book bug in an IVP warehouse, and then from there, I had a stint. I was a graphic artist designer. I worked for a graphic arts company. I did full page ad. This is back in the day, pre-Mac. And then, I went from graphic art design to being a book buyer. For a ministry organization, and then after that, for a chain owned by the Mennonite Publishing House called Provident Bookstores back in the day in the 80s and I guess early 90s. They've since the Mennonite Publishing House closed them back in the day. But so I was a buyer for that chain. And then that led me to being a marketing director at David C. Cook in Canada. And while working there, I left and did my own marketing company for Waterbrook Press and Cumberland House and Howard Publishing.
Mm-hmm.
That brought me to the U.S. Waterbrook Press brought me down to Colorado. Originally, it was supposed to be 6 to 9 months as a consultant. And then I got on full time with them, and we've been in Colorado now 20 years. So I was a publisher. I acquired, one of my career highlights was we acquired at Waterbrook Harold Shaw Publishers. And in acquiring them, we acquired a number of books by Madeleine L'Engle if you've read A Wrinkle in Time, Walk on Water. So that was one of my highlights in my publishing career, getting to work with Madeleine L'Engle and her granddaughter, Charlotte. Then I became publisher at Waterbrook. I left that for a stint as a literary agent, as you indicated, and represented a group of authors. That was fun. And then left there to go to another publisher here in town, all publishers here in Colorado. We didn't want to move at this point.
Yeah.
This was home. So went to David C. Cook, and our sort of big launch was acquiring Francis Chan, who was a little known pastor from Simi Valley, which is, kind of where we connected at some point. Launched that. And then from David C. Cook, I went over to a smaller imprint, Navigators, Nav Press. So Nav Press is the publishing arm of the Navigators ministry, and was there for about 6.5 years. And then I left. I resigned that position this past fall. Okay. My wife and I, through the COVID experience working from home, just really felt being called out of that. Mm-hmm. And so January 4, we launched Pape Commons, which is a literary agency. It's a gathering of voices. I'm calling it's a literary agency with a difference. It's community over commodity. Okay. I really want to work on, whilst I'm a literary agent and brokering, manuscripts, I also want to really build community. I think writing is a lonely existence. Yeah. I think for Christian writers, it's even lonelier. And then I just want to build community and really, Preston, to help Christian writers get out of what I'm calling the evangelical bubble. We're preaching to the choir for the most part and fostering a really robust bestseller industry. But I think there's time and a place, particularly now, for Christians to represent Jesus a little bit better without any political affiliation and speak to our times. So whether it's fiction or nonfiction, I'm excited.
Yeah, I'm excited too. I mean, you bring a wealth of a diverse array of experience to that. So I'm excited to see what that turns out. And I want to return to the whole evangelical bubble in Christian publishing, and would love to have you kind of help us understand what goes on behind the curtain, so to speak, in Christian publishing. But first, why don't we, let's talk about just what does it mean to become a writer, or specifically, like, I know a lot of people in this audience listening maybe are writers or aspiring writers. Like, what's your kind of big picture advice when somebody comes to you and says, "Hey, Don, I think I want to write a book. How do I do that? Like, where do I go from there?" What's your response to that question? I'm sure you've gotten that a lot over the years.
Well, I'll do an on-air plug. Read George Saunders' book, A Swim in a Pond in the Rain. That's a great resource. Okay. He's a master class writer, prof on writing. So that's a start. Donald Moss, if you're a fiction writer. Okay. I mean, I'll cut to the chase. Just write really well. There's a lot of crap out there. Mm-hmm. And I jokingly tell authors, I'm all about fine wine. And what I mean by that is there's a lot of Kool-Aid out there, instant stuff. Pour a little water and a little flavor and you get, orange Kool-Aid or strawberry Kool-Aid. There's nothing like a beautiful bouquet on a Merlot, right? Or a Chateauneuf du Pape. I have no money gained from saying that, but so yeah, I just encourage writers to hone their craft. And what I mean by that is sometimes it might mean taking a BFA course or degree or an MFA. It might mean 42 rejections and then finally the good one. It might mean just really writing, what Anne Lamott calls bad. What are they? First drafts.
Yeah.
So I see a lot of poor writing out there.
Yeah.
Christians and non-Christians alike. So I'm not picking on just a Christian, but I think we get away with Christians writing poorly, and I feel like we should have a higher standard.
Yeah. Why is that? I mean, I from somebody who's slowly learned the craft of writing. It's taken me many years. I didn't aspire to be a writer till 15 years ago. So it's time. I've been playing catch up on the back end of what it even means to be a good writer, and I still in no way consider myself a good writer. I'm okay, I think, but I've learned to appreciate. Wow, when I read a good writer, like I'm reading The Road by Cormac. Forgot his last name. Anyway, super creative. I just got done with The Great Gatsby and To Kill a Mockingbird and some of the classics. I'm like, these are beautiful, creative writers. I don't see a lot of that in the Christian world. How does that Kool-Aid get through? Like what is explained to help us understand the environment where so much Kool-Aid is being produced, if I could put it like that.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because I often say some of my favorite Christian novels are written or published by non-Christian publishing houses. I think of Leif Enger's Peace Like a River, or John Dalton, Heaven Lake, and Gilead. Some really beautiful writing. I jokingly said to an editor recently, if Bonhoeffer or C.S. Lewis was starting out today, they wouldn't have a hope in hell.
Why is
honestly,
that? Why?
Because probably C.S. Lewis wouldn't have an Instagram account, and Bonhoeffer's not big on Facebook, and so much I hear it over and over again is, well, your writer doesn't have a platform, and it's based on how many Facebook followers do you have, how many memes can you create, the Twitter following, and so that's become our kind of ground level judgment is, Preston, if you have 52,000 followers on Twitter and you have a great Instagram account with pretty memes, we'll get you a deal. But if you're a really good writer, man, it sucks to be you. I mean, that's being crass, but it's the challenge that's before us. And I feel like, I am being crass when I say that, but I feel like there's a time and place, and that's what I'm about, is like, I'm saying, yeah, that's all good, and it's reaching the masses, but I really want, my mentor, Dan Rich, often reminded us, you want to publish a book that's going to be long-standing, that's going to have the long tail, that 25 years from now, people are still talking. And you look at that, that's Madeleine L'Engle, it's C.S. Lewis, it is Bonhoeffer, it's Tolkien, it's, a number of those authors that you go, yeah, they've withstood the test of time. People are still talking about them and reading them. And, I'm not going to mention names, but there's a lot of Christian books out there on the market that 5 years from now, heck, 12 months from now, probably won't exist.
So it is a tension. I mean, help me wrestle with this, because, Christian publishers, obviously the assumption is they want to put out good content, and each publishing house has their kind of theological boundaries and what they see as like beneficial for the kingdom of God. At the same time, it is a business. So if a mega church pastor with all these followings comes and says, hey, I want to put this sermon series into a book, and the publisher's thinking like, well, this can easily sell 50,000 copies just by his own platform. Like, it still is a bit like the publisher needs to pay the bill. So I don't I used to be a little more cynical, like more idealistic, like how dare you, put out something that's fluff, like just put out good writing. But it's like, well, they still have to exist. So if nobody's going to buy it or appreciate it for 10 years, like then the people aren't going to pay the bills. So is that a live tension that you have to wrestle with? Or do you feel like
I mean, that's very much the tension is, okay, because not only does the publisher have to pay the bills, but you, the author, need to pay bills. So
right.
I can't ask you, Preston, okay, tell your wife, hey, you're going off for the next 6 months and you're going to hang out at your writing cabin in the mountains of Colorado and write an amazing book. And by the way, we're not going to make any income.
Right. Right.
So you have to be duly compensated, as does the publisher. And so, but I think where the tension has occurred is that, it's gotten to the place where a lot of money is being paid out that is never recouped. That's what we call the advance, which is kind of tantamount to a loan. So, I do a book deal with you and I say, you know what, I'm going to loan you $30,000. And then when I make that money back based on the sales of your book, then you'll start to get a nice revenue, the royalty stream.
Right.
And so the bigger the loan, so to speak, the more books we have to sell, and so, you look at Barack Obama's book, that's $35. Well, there's a reason that book is $35 and they're trying to sell because, it was a 7-figure advance that the publisher wants to recoup. I think it would be much better to get a reasonable advance and get subsequent checks for royalties than to get this one big lump sum and then never see another dime. So what essentially I mean by that is the author gets overpaid, just $1 million and their book sells 20,000 copies. So anyway, it's perspective, but it very much is the tension of the author and the publisher world about, how much money we're going to pay for this book and not lose our shirt. And then, go ahead.
Well, I want to come back to the advanced thing. I'm just to give our audience kind of a ballpark figure. Say you're a first-time author. You've got a good idea for a book. You've got maybe 10,000 followers on Twitter. Maybe you're a pastor. Your church is like 500 people. You could probably sell a few hundred copies on your own. The publisher's like, no, this is a good book idea. I think we want to publish it. What kind of advance and royalties are we looking at for somebody like that?
So I now see everyone leaning in to see what number I'm going to say, and I can see the entire agency community panicking. And also published authors going, well, I didn't make that much money. So at the risk of offending everybody that's listening, I would say, given that scenario, first-time author, they bring something to the table. It's you could be as low as a $10,000 advance, as high as maybe 30, 35,000. Depending on the publisher. So it all comes down to the publisher saying, I want to take a risk on this author, and whilst I may think it's this dollar value, I also think it's a dollar value in investing in Preston. Okay. So I think, Preston, your book project is probably worth $15,000, but I also want to invest in you as a writer and as a spokesperson for our company and having someone on the roster. So I'm going to overpay. I'm going to pay probably another 10. So I'm going to pay you $25,000 for this property because I really love to have you on board.
Okay. Yeah.
And then of course it escalates if you're, a pastor of a mega church, and you're bringing 5,000-10,000 people that are going to be your consumer. It escalates.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when a mega church pastor, and Andy Stanley, I'm blanking on past,
Craig Rochelle,
yeah,
Mark Patterson. There's a number of them out there that are,
when they have a huge platform like that, and you don't need, so I'm not, let's just leave aside specific names because I don't want to give people an impression that I know how much they got. But for somebody with a really big platform, aside from the quality of the book. I mean, they're in the 6-figure advance. That's pretty common for somebody that, would you say, or even 7 figures?
Yeah, and let's pause here and pray that they're all tithing.
Right.
You might want to edit that part out.
No, I don't want to edit anything out. So
yeah, I mean, yeah, if you are a large pastor, and of course, as you build on your career and you're now in book 2 or 3, then you're building an audience, right? So you've now gone from 40,000 people to maybe 50,000 or 100,000. Right. And so the publisher now knows, okay, when we do your book, Pastor Mega, we know that we have a built-in congregation of your 20,000,
right?
Or your listeners, and some of these authors, think of them as global influence, and so that allows the publisher, to take foreign licensing and publish. I think back to Crazy Love with Francis, where that sold rights to Korea and Germany and a variety of different countries, and so that all is part of your earning back your advance.
Yeah. So in my more cynical moments, when people come to me and say, "Hey, I want to write a book. Can you hook me up with David C. Cook or Zondervan?" In my more cynical moments, my next question isn't even what's your book about, but like, well, how many followers do you have? Like, what kind of marketing collateral can you set forth? Otherwise, these publishers probably aren't even going to look at your book. Is that how is that cynical, or is that pretty truthful? Or
no, you're not being cynical at all. I mean, I have a number of authors that I'm working with right now. One in particular who's a pastor of a church that has I think 3 or 4 congregations, but they're not a mega church.
Yeah.
Amazing content, but every editor reviewing it saying, whilst it's a good book, this beloved pastor doesn't have a big enough platform. So, he doesn't have the 150,000 tweets and all that kind of stuff, Twitters. So, so you're not being cynical at all. I think all the publishing houses have established these benchmarks or even mandates, I believe, where it says, okay, editor, if you're acquiring this person, they need to bring X to the table. And so, it's going to vary from publisher to publisher. I don't know. I'm discovering what that is, but every publisher is going to be different. And to the credit of the editor, every now and then an editor is going to say, you know what, I'm going to ring this author. I'm going to, ring this author up the flagpole. I really believe in them. And I'm going to try to wrestle sales and marketing to the ground and say, hey guys, I'm not asking too much here, but can we take a risk on this person? Because I think they have something to say, and long term they could be a player. They could, while they, maybe are just entering the publishing field, and maybe they only have, 1,000 people listening to the podcast.
Yeah,
I think there's potential here. And P.S. their writing's not half bad. So that helps.
I mean, that's almost word for word what you told me back in 2011. I mean, I was a no-name author. Francis knew me. We did this book together, and then I did 2 more with David C. Cook when you were there. And you said, hey, I think you even told me that, or maybe I heard from you. Well, and honestly, that like you're like, I think I want to get behind this. I like his voice. I think he has something to say. And
yeah, and I smile because, I mean, just recently I saw that your publisher is bringing those books back out with new covers and in the case of Fight, for example, a new title. And you're right. I mean, when I vividly remember meeting with you in that Irish pub in California, you were driving one heck of a clunker. And I thought, if nothing else, we need to help this guy buy some gas for this car. But but no, I just remember meeting with you and thinking you have a fresh voice. And, like I look at the book Fight. That wasn't being talked about, right. And it was a fresh approach to nonviolence, And, I mean, certainly, like, I think the team at Cook are very wise in bringing that book out again,
Yeah.
particularly our current state in America. So it's very much a dialogue or a discussion that needs to be brought to the marketplace again. So,
Right.
yeah.
So the question I always get is what makes a book take off, So you have a new author, you're like, I think there's something here, like maybe Francis back in the day, or like, what is there a kind of a magic formula to this is a really good book, and they might not have that platform, but then all of a sudden this thing just explodes and takes off. I mean, every year there's always those books like, wow, we did not think this would just catch on. Like, is there a magic formula or some things you can sniff out or foresee, or is it just pure luck or providence, I guess we should say?
Yeah, I mean, years ago I worked for Steve Rubin at Doubleday, and his line was, publishing is blind ass luck. And of course, you've got Christian listeners, so we won't say that. We'll use that word you use, providence. And it really oftentimes within the context of Christian writers, it is God's hand on a project. But, I have to say, word of mouth is still amazing. You look at, for example, Paul Young's The Shack,
Yeah.
That he self-published and ultimately Hachette picked up. But that was word of mouth.
Wait,
I remember
he self-published that? He self-published that?
Yeah.
Wow.
When it first came out, it was self-published. And I remember being in Vancouver with Bill Reimer at Regent College and him saying, you probably haven't heard of this guy, but this is an amazing read. And for example, here's what Eugene Peterson says about this book. And it was on the recommendation of Bill Reimer at Regent that I said, I got to pick this book up. And Windblown Media, I think is what it was called then. But yeah, and I think of Francis, when Crazy Love came out, he had spoken at a number of Passion events, and my son had heard him speak at a chapel at Azusa Pacific. And that's how I found out about him. Was my son Jeremy called up and said, Dad, I've just heard this amazing pastor from Simi Valley. You've got to check him out, and so there was this kind of pent up demand. Like, people had heard, like, I remember hearing him speak in January at the Staples event. Like, there's a Passion event in LA downtown, and everyone was hearing him speak. And so there was this, by the time the book came out in May, it hit, and there was this demand for it. And whilst, we were kind of in a new era with COVID and online sales and all that, it's still people talking, still a book getting a buzz. And, like, have you read The Vanishing Half, for example? Or, have you read, the new whatever, pick a new topic. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what happens is people pick up on a good book. Mm-hmm. Now, the flip side is true. People pick up on drivel as well. There's it's the masses. So, but I think, I look at in my career way back when launching Jan Karen with the Mitford series at home in Mitford. Mm-hmm. Here's a woman that had back in the day, no platform. She was 55 years old, came out of the advertising market, and she wrote this cute little story set in North Carolina. And it was word of mouth. She back in the day, again, she traveled to the bookstores and talked to people. That we're kind of restricted by that now, but authors that are willing to work hard, that's the other thing. You really have to, I think there was a day, Preston, where an author could give their manuscript to a publisher and then kind of walk away to their hermit life while the publisher brought it to market. Now the author has to do, podcasts and vlogs and Zoom calls to small groups, meeting in homes and all that. And I think the reality is you just have to recognize that. I have to do a little bit more work as an author than just write the book. Yeah. And some authors, you can name the authors. Some are, way out there in terms of their marketing skills, and others are novices. but it does involve,
Yeah.
you talking, like I remember you speaking at a Q event.
Yeah.
And that, that wasn't just for the benefit of you going to an event in Denver. It was for more people, more of an audience to build around you and know this guy is talking about, nonviolence and pacifism in a fresh new way I'd not heard. So, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's honestly, for me as a writer, that is my number one um dislike or like the thing I really wrestle with. And I think Francis and I do see eye to eye on a lot of that, like the whole idea of building a platform makes me want to punch myself in the face. And yet, um do I always have to remind myself, do I believe that I'm writing truth in a fresh way, in a way that's going to impact people, that's going to further the kingdom in some way? And well, the answer is obviously yes, otherwise I wouldn't put thousands of hours into doing it. So
Right.
if I believe that this is good for humanity and the church, then shouldn't I want it to fall into the hands of as many people as possible? And the answer is yes. So that whole idea of building, it just, when I see other people try to build a platform, it just irks me, So I never even want the perception of that, Sounds like I'm virtue signaling now from my, but I mean, I really, and my
No, I
publishers
think
know that about me, and they're like, "Hey, Prescott, I know you don't like this, but can you maybe don't be afraid to tweet it once in a while, And so I've been trying to do more of it without looking like an idiot, I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that? I mean,
I think there's some natural ways to do it, but you're right. It doesn't come naturally to most authors. I'll never forget Preston. Francis, he was on, I think, the cover of Outreach magazine. He was speaking at the pastors conference down in San Diego. And, as a publisher, we were all set up. We had the books stacked high and watch them fly kind of thing. And he speaks and then says, yeah, I'm not going to come out there and sign books. And, there's a line of like 250 pastors waiting to shake his hand and get him to sign their Crazy Love book.
yeah.
And, we had to say, sorry.
And
He's,
his motivation is right, but at the same
it was
time,
pure, very pure.
but
And
it does make him look a little bit, somebody could take it the wrong way, or maybe something he said or did just radically change somebody's life. And the thought of like just saying, thank you for God's work in you, you impacted me. Like there could be a lot of pure motives all around there that sometimes don't work out. What are your thoughts? Yeah. What are you said it doesn't come naturally for most authors. For me, sometimes it comes almost too naturally for some, though. Like they love, their Instagram feed is like every other picture, the book they wrote or whatever. Look at me, go, but it just looks a little too much. Like, are you primarily a marketer and secondarily an author, or like, I don't know?
And the answer is probably yes.
Don, what are your thoughts on self-publishing? I've had people ask me, "Hey, I want to write a book. Do you think I should self-publish it or try to go for a traditional publisher to take it on?"
Yeah, it's becoming much more. In fact, I just had breakfast with someone this morning, and they asked that very question, and I said, I think it's appropriate, and it depends on the person. I think there are some authors that maybe may have a pastorate or a ministry where that's their focus and their channel, and it's very appropriate to contact a place that can self-publish their 1,000 copies or 500 copies. You've got some people who are in ministry who, are speaking regularly to a variety of people, whether it's retreats or churches. And so they have that built-in platform, and it's a natural thing. And so, yes, I kind of see that for authors that have an opportunity to do a bigger platform, that's your last resort. So let's see if we can find a bona fide Tyndale House or Waterbrook or, Thomas Nelson to publish you, because I think your platform merits a team behind it that not only can publish it and edit it well, but will take it to market. And by that, they'll get it to, Amazon and Barnes and Noble and independent bookstores, but also globally, so that they'll be able to license it at the London Book Fair or Frankfurt or have the inroads to reach out to those markets
Mhm.
that typically self-publishing doesn't allow or offer.
Yeah.
And so, but I will say it's self-publishing, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, when you self-published, it was sort of like, oh, poor boy, you couldn't get a deal, right? And it showed. The covers looked poorly executed, and it was published on newsprint or whatever. The quality has improved, and I think the outlets that are offering those services are giving better editorial
Okay.
services, and also they're making sure your book gets on Amazon or wherever. So
Yeah.
I think the writer has to decide. Um, do I want to go with a house that offers all those services and opportunities, or am I willing to invest? The other thing about self-publishing, I should just mention, is you have to invest upfront some money. Like, you're going to have to pay to buy your book and to buy the editorial
Yeah.
service and design element and all that. So when you go that route, you have to say, okay, I'm willing to invest X number of dollars.
Tell us about the royalty difference. Like, say you go with a traditional publisher, the book sells for $20 a pop. What's the author getting there compared to if he self-publishes it? Now, obviously, it's going to sell. Well, maybe people don't know it's obvious, but I mean, if a traditional publisher takes it on, it's going to sell, twice, three times the number of books, but they're also going to get a lot less on the royalty. So, what on $20 book? What does an author get? Traditional published book?
Actually, sometimes, to be honest, you may get with a traditional publisher, and truth be told, the publisher may only sell 3,000 copies, and you make 15% of net. And so you do the math and go, man, if that's all I'm going to get, if I bought my book and sold it, I'm going to make more money because I know I can sell 2,000. So you almost have to sit down and do a spreadsheet.
Yeah.
And say, okay, if I do it this route through a traditional publisher, I will get this. The other thing is, how much are you willing to do? Like, you have your wife and family, so you have sort of a built-in warehouse staff that can pick, pack, and ship. Truth be told, though, nowadays you can just have it on, at Amazon, and they print on demand whatever you need when you need it. Okay. So it really is an exercise in mathematics, to be honest, and say, okay, I would get, let's say you get a 15% royalty off net from a publisher, and then I would get cost plus from printing it myself. And you can dictate, you see, like, you can say, okay, this is a $20 book that, costs me $7. Like, you just have to do the math and figure out, okay, what is reasonable for me to sell? And who do I want my audience to be global? And by that, I mean a traditional publisher versus kind of more regional. And by that, I mean more focused on your ministry and who your audience is.
So it used to be like $1 a book. It was kind of the round figure that we would say an author would get. Books are going up in price. Is it still like $1 to $2 a book at the end of the day?
Yeah, roughly. I mean, we always that's kind of the formula you say, and I think you could make more money. I'm hesitating because it's going to vary from publisher to publisher. And honestly, if you print on demand, it's going to vary from, what is the arrangement you made with Lightning Source versus Believer Press, or, any number of independent, print on demand houses.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So you recently left the evangelical publishing world. Why did you make that move? I mean, we talked a little bit offline. Like, what would be your what's your this adventure you're going on? Like, what do you hope to see, and what would you maybe in a theoretical world love to see different, maybe in evangelical publishing?
Yeah, I mean, you used the word adventure. That's the word my wife used. I remember when we made the decision Ruthie saying to me, "Let the adventure begin." Like we were heading off for newfound territory. I was scared spitless, and she was enthusiastic. So off we went. And I think, well, I don't think it was the recognition, Preston. Kind of the culmination of COVID, working from home, Black Lives Matter, the election that became so polarizing, and realizing, kind of stepping back. And I'm also Canadian, born in Brazil. Like I realized I have a global view. Like my world is much bigger than what I've been calling the evangelical bubble. And so I just thought, I really respect the Christian publishers. I really respect the navigators, of which I was a part. But for me personally, my world was so much bigger than that. And one of my great desires for this new adventure is to find other like-minded people who can speak as people of faith, people who would say, "I'm a Jesus follower, and I want to speak to the broader world that speaks outside of this ghetto or this community we've created."
Yeah.
And I can write a really great novel that will go alongside of Kristen Hanna, or I want to see a psychologist speak to the general audience about trauma as a Christian. And I read a lot of books, and I read a leadership book written by a Buddhist, or like Stephen Covey is a Mormon, and I just want Christian writers to write to a broader audience outside of this wonderful community called the evangelicals. But I think that many Christian writers, many Christ followers, have things to say about marriage, about divorce, frankly, or trauma, or whatever.
Yeah.
That a general audience, like my neighbor, can read that. And so that's my heart, is that I can align myself with writers who want to write to a much broader audience.
Here's a question I have. I've wanted to ask you this for a long time. I don't think I've asked you this, or at least maybe thought out loud in front of you about this. But so most of the books I read are by non-Christians. I actually don't read a ton of theology anymore. I feel like I've done a lot of that. And there's so many interesting books in psychology and sociology that I like to read. Now, some of the books I read, like you mentioned trauma. So The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk. This is not, it's not a hard read, but this is an in-depth, thoughtful, like he deals with really tough concepts. I think it's like a 300+ page book. I'm reading another book called Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. This is a 400+ page book, small font, that's incredibly in-depth. It's a slow read. This book has been out for almost 10 years and it's still a New York Times bestseller. Body Keeps the Score is like ranked number 50 on Amazon or whatever, which is super, super high, as you know. Why? Here's my question. Why is it that in the secular world, very long, very intellectual books are bestsellers? Look at the bestseller list. I mean, most of them nonfiction are really intelligent books. But if I was going to pitch a 400 page really intellectual book to any Christian publisher, and okay, so maybe my audience isn't big enough, whatever, but I don't think anybody, they would say, can you get this under like 200 pages, and write and tell stories? And what does that, what does that mean? Like, how come that doesn't work in the Christian world, or does it? Am I missing something here?
Well, you and I talked earlier about, I tend to skew to fine wine, and we put out a lot of Kool-Aid. It's easier to generate, right? You just open a little packet, add a little water, and boom, you got it. I'd rather work with an author for a little time and get out a fine bouquet of Cabernet or a Zinfandel, rather than a strawberry flavored Kool-Aid. And I think the Christian market, for the most part, has tolerated or given us Kool-Aid. And, again, I reference my mentor, Dan Rich, who always said, I'd far rather put out books that will stand the test of time. And, I was really privileged, for example, at Nav Press with publishing the likes of Dan Allender,
Right.
or
Yeah.
Jerry Bridges, whose books were, 20 years old, but, put a new cover on it and find a new audience. You do talk about word length. I do think we have a new generation emerging that has a shorter attention span. And, there's all kinds of research about what online, of this stuff has done to our brain and how we're, short circuiting it.
Yeah.
So as a result, where we used to read 70,000 words, we now only can tolerate 40.
Yeah.
But it's interesting, I still look at some of the books that are coming out. You look at how kids were reading Harry Potter, and everyone said, well, kids don't read.
Right.
But they're reading big books. And I think if they're well written, an amazing story, it doesn't matter the page count. But yeah, I think, I don't want to disparage the Christian industry, but I think we have somewhat kowtowed to the lowest common denominator and said, we're going to give you Kool-Aid because Kool-Aid sells. And fine wine is harder to sell and takes longer, but sometimes, you got to keep the wine, the grapes in the warehouse for 5-6 years. And, you see that pattern where in Christian publishing, oh, that author just bought a book out last year, and now he's got another book. Now he's got another book. And that, and, someone might want to say to them, you were a one-book author.
in the UK
names.
Yeah. In the UK, they used to look in the UK. It's very much like some of the most brilliant academic theologians. It's one book every 6 years or something, and they kind of look across the pond at us Americans, and they kind of, in their very British way, kind of go, never an unpublished thought, and that was my PhD advisor, Simon Gathercole. That was his one parting piece of advice: is Preston, don't over-publish. And I don't know if I've actually taken up. I've probably written too many books. I mean, looking back, even Francis said, I don't want to write a book until I'm 40 years old. Like what right. Until I have some lived experience, like what am I gonna should I even write a book? And it was, when he was 40, when he wrote Crazy Love. But yeah. Well,
it goes back to the tension we talked about earlier about publishers wanting to make money. And so if your book takes off, the publisher is immediately going to turn around and say, what else can you write for us?
Yeah.
And that is the tension. And, it takes a brave publisher to say, hey, let's sit back and not generate another book. Let's wait, for the grapes to ferment and bring out a book in 5 years rather than 5 months. So,
right,
but it definitely is the tension. It's that wire.
I still, my wishful thinking maybe is, again, going back to my point about these big in-depth books that are New York Times bestsellers in the secular world. My what I want to believe, Don, is that I just wonder if those kinds of books written well, that are thoughtful, that are engaging, that are in-depth, I just wonder if there is more Christians who would purchase and actually read those things. But maybe, I don't know, maybe again, like you said, the audience is so used to, 188 page books that are basically kind of written sermons, which I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but you don't see that in a secular world. You don't see Malcolm Gladwell or whatever writing a book that's just kind of his speech is compiled. Actually, I don't even know. Maybe that is. But I mean, you see actual writers putting a ton of time and sometimes creating a very long book. But it's, I don't know.
Yeah, I think there's I think you see some, the general market is so much bigger than the Christian market. So inevitably there's going to be some books being churned out.
Okay.
But yeah, you look at the bestseller list for fiction, the Vanishing Half, Ready Player 2, The Mystery of Mrs. Christie, The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue, or those books, I would dare say that the authors you're not going to see another book from them next year.
Right.
Ready Player One, when did that come out? 5 years ago? I can't remember. But you look at some of these books, and like a book like I'm seeing on the bestseller list here, American Dirt. That's been on there for probably a year, maybe.
Wow.
I don't know how long it's been on, but it's been on for a while, and so it stands the test of time.
Yeah, yeah. Do you have any favorite? Are you allowed to say your favorite Christian nonfiction writers that you feel like are actually not just Christians with truth to say and a good platform, but actually, man, this person is an actual like writer. Like they're a gifted writer.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, for a little Canadian content on this broadcast, I think both Mark Buchanan, who he was a pastor in British Columbia on the island there, is now a prof at a Bible college in Calgary.
Okay.
Anything Mark Buchanan writes is beautiful and thoughtful. I think Anne Voskamp is another beautiful, poetic, lyrical writer.
Yeah.
And you see that in like a new writer that's just releasing for me that I think I really see potential is Joel Clarkson. Wrote a book called Sensing God. And I'm hesitant to start going down the list because I'll say someone and then Andrew Arndt will say, "Why didn't you say my name?" Well, Andrew,
no,
Andrew also is a favorite of mine.
Yeah.
So, but I will say this: I'm excited about some new voices, and my prayer is that the marketplace would give space for new voices. That's one thing about the Christian publishing. And again, I won't say names, but the Christian publishers, you go to the list and you go, okay, it's that person again or that person again.
Yeah.
And rarely do you see, some new names populating that. And I would just love to see, opportunity for, the Andrew Arndts and Daniel Grothys of the world to get that opportunity to find their niche or their audience in amongst the Gary Thomases and Max Lucados of the world.
Right. I often think from a publishing standpoint that they have kind of their high level authors that are going to sell 100,000 copies. They're kind of largely carrying the company. Then you have mid-level authors. I probably put myself in that category. I'm not going to sell 100,000. I might sell 20 or 30 or maybe something could go somewhere, but it's, and then you have kind of beginning authors that are just breaking in. Does a publisher have kind of like an approach like, okay, let's keep our high powered people happy. Let's, that's going to carry us. But they're kind of more exploring like, man, can some of these mid-level people, I just wonder, is this the book that's going to really boom, or this unknown author? I think there's something here. Let's invest in this person and see if we can, maybe there's like 10 new authors and maybe one might take off. Like, is this how publishers think, the way I've kind of explained it, or?
Yeah, all the publishers are on their knees praying by their bedside. Because what I think it's last year I read an article in PW or somewhere. Once they indicated that the mid list was shrinking. So the A level authors, like you mentioned, the Danielle Steeles, the John Grishams, the John Eldridges, and the Max Lucados, those were sort of they were expanding, and then the mid list was shrinking. And so those B level authors just weren't being able to crack into that, A level market. And, with the demise of, particularly Christian brick and mortar, you don't have what that word is, the discoverability people. So, it's either word of mouth or trusting Amazon or a website to say, okay, you need to read about this guy kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so that's where, your smiley face on Instagram or Facebook pictured with your book is really important, because when you realize 65% of consumers are finding you here and not in a bookstore, in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, that is the challenge, So.
Yeah.
But
I'm
my hope is that publishers will give, space for mid-listers with the desire or the hope that, as you indicated, one of these 10 has the potential to be an A-lister. And if we
yeah.
foster them and help them grow in their writing, 5 years from now, they'll be a contender to replace, because yes, some of these A-listers now are going to be great backlists for publishers,
Mhm.
20, 25 years from now, but we do need fresh voices.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. I love hearing the story about Jen Hatmaker, who I think wrote like 5 like, and she's a beautiful writer, brilliant writer, creative, funny, and she's all, but like it took her like 5 or 6 books, and then all of a sudden that one just absolutely took off. But I think that's an example of somebody who is like, she always had it. It's just the first 5 just right. That didn't she have about 5 books? Or just
Yeah,
kind of like
yeah,
this.
exactly. And one took off, but then, for example, at NAB Press, we were able to bring one of those 5 back out,
Mm,
and
okay.
it went from selling, in the 2-figure number to like 100,000 units.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, so but it requires, I think John Grisham's A Time to Kill, his first novel, it was rejected by 20 some publishing
Wow.
houses. And I think a lot of it's interesting. There's a number of stories like that, but
Yeah.
it took a editor, willing to champion that voice and say, I think there's something here. And guys, I know that it's a big risk, but let's take it on Preston,
Yeah.
and let's see if we can't make him. And that goes for a lot of authors.
Yeah.
It was that editor, Jason Kaufman taking a risk on Da Vinci Code with Dan Brown and saying, or Steve Rubin saying, there's something here,
Yeah.
we're going to risk it, and we're going to bring it to market.
Don, thanks so much. You've given us so much of your wisdom and stuff, and yeah, thanks so much. I mean, I really like you're my kind of go-to person whenever I have any questions about writing or publishing or anything, and so thanks for sharing with us on Theology in the Raw. I've been looking forward to this episode for a while because I've never done anything like this. It's usually a theological topic, a controversial issue, but I've never actually had somebody like you on that can give us the inside look at publishing. So check out Pape Commons. Your website is papecommons.com, or
Yep.
what's the...
Yep, papecommons.com, and my son is the proud designer guy behind it. I don't know how to do these things, so I gave him the content, and yeah, we're up and running, and my phone is ringing in the background.
Are you looking for, if anybody's like, oh good, I'm gonna contact Don because I got this book idea and maybe he can look at it, are you soliciting proposals, or no, is it more through an agent?
I'm not soliciting, but I never say no, because there might just, I don't want to say no to that diamond in the rough. But I would simply say, if you're going to contact me, be serious about the craft and have something, like, don't be noodling,
Right.
be serious and say, hey, I've written this 100,000-word novel. uh,
Yeah.
I'm just kidding.
Can you read it real quick?
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Well, thanks so much for being on the show. Oh,
My passion is to discover new voices and become the steward of that.
yeah.
And I think back to you and we've had fun doing stewarding
Mhm.
your writing career over the years.
Yeah. Yeah. And I really appreciate it, man. And hopefully we can work together sometime again.
There's always been good food involved too.
Oh man. If you ever, yeah, if I'm ever traveling in a different city, yeah, I know I can reach out to you and say, tell me the best breakfast, lunch, and dinner places in this place, and you'll have a list ready to go.
That was our last time, actually, breakfast in Nashville.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. Yeah. Well,
So
yeah,
funny.
I don't want to take any more of your time, Don. Thanks so much for giving us your hour plus of your day.
Yeah, all the best. Good to talk to you.
Take care.